Hey guys, welcome to the JPD question and answer videos. In this series, I'll be diving into the comment section of my YouTube channel and picking out your questions about drumming, technique, gear, practice tips, you name it. If there's anything you're unsure or want to know more about, just leave a comment under any of my videos and I'll try to feature your question in the next episode. Alright, let's jump into it. So the first comment I want to talk about today, it's not actually a question, but it's somebody that mentioned how you can hurt your knees by playing and executing the swivel motion, which is something that I agree with and I've been stressing for a long time to have the correct approach to execute this type of motion, because it is something that can lead to injuries if done in the wrong way. So I've been using the swivel and been playing the swivel technique for 15 years at least, professionally, so on stages, live, in studio. So that means practicing every day and really working many hours a week, swiveling, and I have no issues. I never had any knee injuries or knee issues, and there are a few reasons for this, that explain why I never really had any problems with this technique. The first reason, it's my approach on the pedals, that is very light. I have a very light approach. I don't press the pedals down and then work against the pedals. I don't think of raising the heel, putting a lot of pressure towards the front, which also, even if you don't swivel, but just with the heel up, it can lead to issues because you're putting a lot of tension and a lot of pressure towards the front of the knee. But instead, my approach of being very light allows me to not really put my body under a lot of stress and a lot of fatigue when I'm doing this. So by having this approach, I am not kind of like creating a lot of tension and a lot of pressure in the knee area. The second thing is my posture. I don't put weight in front. I don't lean towards the pedal. My body weight is on the stool, right? So I keep the head in the center, in line with the center of the stool, so that then I have to just deal with the weight of the legs. Whenever I raise the heels, I'm not changing anything in the upper part of my body, but it's just, raising the heels, and I have very little muscular activation, and then from there, I just kind of like swivel the feet, right? And because of the light approach on the pedals, I don't really go and create any type of extreme tension in the knee areas. And the third thing is that I'm very careful in calibrating, and I've developed a motion that calibrates the swivel motion. I don't kind of like go all in on one side or all out on the outside of the motion, but I'm kind of like controlling the motion, the side-to-side motion, in a way that I don't constantly hit, all the way out or all the way in, that maybe in the long run, kind of like, it's like you're constantly hitting the maximum lateral motion of the foot until the knee stops it, and so in the long run, it might hurt you, but it's a controlled motion. And also because I use it from fast to very fast. Usually I start swiveling around 200, 210 BPM faster. There isn't even enough time at that speed to go so much far out or in for the foot to really go and turn and twist the knee so much. So these three things combined allow me to avoid getting injured and avoid hurting my knees when I'm doing the swivel. But the most important out of the three is the light approach on the pedal, right? Not putting pressure and then from there forcing the pedals, working against the spring, but being very light, activating the pedal and then controlling it, working with the beater coming back as close to the shoes as possible. The second question is about working without the springs. If you need to do these type of exercises on on a surface that has a good rebound, like a pad? Yes, the answer is yes. It's very important whenever we remove the spring to work with the only the rebound of the pedal, to do it on a surface that has a good rebound. If your pad doesn't have a good rebound, so you just kind of like slightly push the beater towards the pad and the beater just dies against the pad, it means that there is not enough rebound, right? So like a loose drum head would not work for this type of exercises. You need a good rebound. What I use is the Foot Blaster pads. I use the surface number 1. Okay, so it's a thicker surface, it has a lot of rebound, and that helps the pedal to come back. This is because, and it's an essential part of doing these exercises without the springs, because if not, you will end up pressing down on the pedal a lot, kicking the pedal so that the beater bounces back, and it defeats the purpose of the exercise, which is actually to stay very light on the pedal. Right, you want to stay light on the pedal, work on coming back off the surface instead of pushing down. That would choke the pedal. And so if you cannot do this, and the third aspect of this, the third characteristic of working without the spring, is that you can do these exercises as slow as you want, even with the ankle, right? Because if you put the spring on, the spring will keep the beater moving in a consistent way. So if we work slow only with the ankle, we will work against the spring a lot. So instead removing the spring, I can move very slowly, isolate the leg, just do ankle motion, and so have the right approach at a comfortable speed without the spring forcing me to react faster, and then develop from there. But if you don't have a good rebound, then you have an issue, because the pedal will just kind of like die on the surface you're playing, and you have to kick hard, and which means extra tension, and so it doesn't work. You need a good a surface that has a good rebound, either a pad that has a good rebound, or tighten the head, the drum head, as much as you can in a way that it has a good rebound and the pedal bounces back when you have the spring off. The third comment is about a little challenge that I did of playing 60 seconds, left foot actually, ankle motion, tapping on the floor with no pedal, nothing, just kind of like working on the ankle motion. And somebody said that the issue wasn't getting tired, but it was the twitching. So to fix that issue, you want to basically just do it at a speed that it's comfortable. Okay, like you want to start working like in a way that allows you to execute the ankle motion on the floor, just tapping on the floor, even if it's very slow. And there's no issues when you start to develop, the motion. You want to start very slow, and then from there you slowly increase the speed in time. And the reason why the twitching happened, we've been able to see this very clearly at the drum biomech experiment that I did in France, in Nantes, at the University of Nantes, where we did a biomechanical, we put some biomechanical tools, gear on my legs and on my back to kind of like see what was happening inside my body, in my muscles, for my posture and my muscles when I was doing ankle motion. And we could see that when I was doing heel up ankle motion strokes, there was an activation of the shin muscles when I was doing the up stroke, and then an activation of the calf muscles when I was doing the down stroke, right? And it was an alternated activation and deactivation of the two, so that when I was pulling up the foot, the shin muscle will be activated. When I was pushing down, the calf was activated. And when this was evenly alternated, this activation was evenly alternated, my technique was perfect. But every time there was a co-contraction, so both shin and calf were activated, that was where we could see a kind of failure of motion, so the famous twitching. So the twitching was both muscles activating, and so I asked myself the question of, is this because the muscle is tired and I need to strengthen the muscles, Or is it a coordination of the motion issue, meaning that the muscles are confused, that they don't know when one should be activated rather than the other? And so when I went back home, I had some people that never played drums doing this motion. I asked them to just sit down and try to do this motion, and a lot of them were twitching right away. The first 5 strokes were already twitching. So it was impossible that the muscle was already tired, because it was like literally the very first 5 strokes. And so I understood that the issue was the brain and the body not being able to kind of like execute this activation and deactivation in a correct way. So you need to actually educate the body to do this motion correctly. So whenever you have a twitching in your ankle, it's because the body doesn't know the correct sequence of activation and deactivation of the shin and calf muscle. So that's why you want to go and slow it down and get to a speed and a dynamic where you can do it comfortably, so that the body starts to grasp the correct alternation of activity, being like up and down, so shin, calf, and then from there, as you get more and more comfortable, you speed up the motion, and that will help develop the ankle motion a lot. And another important part of this is the toes. If your toes are in constant tension, like either up or going down like that, that constant tension will prevent your muscles from deactivating. So it's a constant contraction, and instead you need to activate, deactivate, activate and deactivate the muscles. So you also need to activate and deactivate the toes. It's like with your hand. If you do this, you feel a little bit of tension in your fingers, but when you go on the way down, you release the tension. You feel activation and deactivation. Exactly the same thing should happen for the toes in our feet. And the body needs to do this type of motion and exercises to educate itself and be able to then know how to like build these connections between the brain and the body, knowing like when to activate and deactivate which muscle, the right sequence. And once you have that, you have to to speed it up. You have to slowly increase the speed, because it's like once you know how to do the muscle, once you know how to do the motion, you need to think faster. Your body needs to be able to execute that motion faster and faster and faster and faster, and that just requires training. So repetition helps a lot in those cases. But first step is to actually be able to do the motion at whatever comfortable speed you can. Then you develop the speed. The next question is about why is the left foot, or I imagine this would be the weaker foot, meaning like somebody that is right-handed and right-footed feels like the left foot is working better than the right foot, even though the right foot is the strong foot and the left foot would be the weak foot. This is a very normal thing that happens, and it's a very common thing. And it was like a big question for many years for me too, because I had exactly the same experience when I was developing the techniques, and I was not sure why. It was just confusing, right? Because I had way more control of my right foot, but when I was developing these motions, the left foot was just better at picking up the informations. So I went to do some research in how the motor system education works through rehabilitation programs and stuff like that, for when people have strokes or car accidents and they have to re-educate, relearn to walk or do certain motions. There's a big literature on the motor system in the scientific and medical field. And so I went there and I've learned something about what it means for the brain to relearn motions, which is basically to reconnect and rewire the brain to a specific limb, right? So let's say that when you are educating the motion, there is, let's say, 4 steps, sequential steps that the body has to do to execute the motion, right? So for example, there's step 1, you raise the leg. Step 2, you bring the leg towards the front. Step 3, you raise the foot. Step 4, you land with the leg. And this is the sequence that you need to do that the brain needs to send to the body to walk, right? It's raise the leg, bring it in front, raise the foot, put down. And then you do that right and left, and you slowly, basically through this execution of sequence of motions, the brain starts to understand what is step 1, step 2, step 3, and step 4. And then you repeat it, and then you repeat it a little bit faster, until it doesn't become like a muscle or memory. And so it becomes an automation. You don't have to think about it anymore. What happens is that on our strong foot, you already have habits. You already have connections of how you were playing the bass drum. And when you introduce a new motion, this motion, it's like you have these very strong connections that have been built throughout the years. And every time you repeat these motions, these connections have been consolidated constantly. So for many years, this neurological path that's been like, confirmed and confirmed and confirmed. And now, and maybe it's a leg motion. And now you're introducing the ankle motion. So it's a new connection because it doesn't go from the leg to the foot, but it cuts out the leg and it goes directly on the ankle. And so you basically, what's happening, you're creating a new wiring, a new set of connections between, the neurons and blah, blah, blah. And so you basically, it's like dropping a little ball, and there's one big lane, which is the old connection, and the ball like usually just goes in that big lane because it's the most consolidated one. And then there's this other little lane, which is the one that you are now starting to introduce. And so your old habits are constantly getting in the way of your new motions. In your left side instead, you don't have such strong connections in your wiring of your brain because you haven't been using the left foot so much, or your weak foot so much. So when you introduce a new connection, a new motion, it's not so, you don't have to fight the old habits so much, but the new information kind of gets picked up a little bit faster. So this is what apparently is happening. This is from all the literature that I've went through. This is what I've read and I've discovered. Okay, so the reason why your strong foot has a harder time, or it takes longer to pick up new information, it's because the old habits are very strong. It's like a lot of noise that gets in the way of this new information. And so you're not only creating a new connection, but you're also fighting a little bit the old habits. While the left side, or the weaker side, it's going to be a little bit more less, educated with older habits, and so new information gets picked up faster and in an easier way. So this is the conclusion that I got from the research that I did, and it's something that I see very common. It's very common. Like so many people that I've done lesson with hundreds and hundreds of people, and this is something that we've seen so many times. This is also why I do unison motions exercises, right? So both right and left foot working together, not alternated, not only single foot, but unison. Because in the unison sections of these exercises, what happens is that your brain is sending the same message at the same time in two different parts of the body. And so the body is auto-educating itself. So it's a weird process, but it's something that helps a lot, the brain and the body to speed up the learning process, because the right side is benefiting from some inputs that are happening on the left side and the other way around. Because what happens is that the brain sends a signal, the body executes the motions and sends a feedback back to the brain. And with this process, the brain and the body learn and educate. So when you do the unison motion, the brain is receiving at the same time two feedbacks from the two sides of the body. And so it's picking up the best scenario of both sides. If we do this for like This type of motion, so like a molar kind of like accent and tap motion, and you do unison motion, you will feel how the left hand or your weaker hand benefits when you're doing unison compared to when you're doing the left hand or the weak hand on its own, because it doesn't have a reference that kind of like helps to guide the motion, right? So when you do unison, here it's a little bit easier for your weak hand to follow. Then when you leave it on your own, it'll get lost a little bit, okay? So this is an example you can try. You can try see how the unison motion, it's easier. Or if you ask to somebody to that never played drums to do something like this, it's easy, right? Because like they can do it right away because it's the same input going in both limbs, and so there's nothing particularly hard to coordinate. It's just pretty straightforward because the two limbs are doing the same thing. But when you start to ask them to do things like this, or one louder than the other, different dynamics, then that becomes complicated because the input is not the same anymore. It's a different dynamic, it's a different thing, so you have to, it's a higher level of complexity of execution, and so you have to educate that input. It's the same principle, like everything that it's unison, it's easy because it's the same thing happening in both sides of the body. As you're starting to, modify and create variations in the two limbs, then you need to educate that it's not so straightforward anymore. This question is about which hand technique should be used for, in this case, a specific exercise. I will expand the questions into like different situations. The first thing I kind of like that determines which technique I will use is the surface that I'm playing on. If it's a surface that has a lot of rebound, then I have options because I can use push-pull, I can use wrist motion, I can use finger motion, because the rebound allows me to use multiple techniques. But if I have a surface that doesn't have a lot of rebound or has very little rebound, then my options are limited. For example, finger technique will be way harder to do on a surface that doesn't have really like a floor tom, because the finger technique relies on the rebound, right? So in that case, I might use something more like wrist motion or molar kind of like approach, or maybe push-pull if, it's not too many strokes in a row where it'll be difficult for the push-pull. But I would adapt my technique based on the surface that I'm on and the response of the surface. When instead I have multiple options and I could use several techniques to execute something, let's say on a like fast single strokes on a snare drum, a tight snare drum, so with a lot of rebound, I choose the technique based on the style. So the finger technique, or based on the speed also. Let's say if I have to go very, very fast, I know I will have to kind of like rely a little bit on the fingers. So when I go beyond 260, 270, the fingers starts to become kind of like necessary because they're faster. And so I just kind of like, the speed is another, let's say, something that I have to keep in consideration, not only the surface that I'm working on. So if it's very fast, I know fingers will have to be involved somehow. But let's say instead I have a speed that I could use push-pull, I could use molar, I could use wrist, or I could use fingers. I have 4 options, all 4 would work. What determines my choice is the style, right? It's the density of sound. I know that the fingers will be a little bit lighter. I know push-pull will be a little bit lighter than just wrist. Wrist will have a little bit more density of sound, and that's the type of sound that I personally like, so I would go with that. So the style and the type of sound that I prefer will determine, in case I have options, which technique I will use. So that's a personal thing. My development has been of developing all the technique that I could. I don't know, I haven't developed the traditional grip, but the rest of the technique I've basically grasped them all and worked on them all so that I have options. But then I usually try to use wrist as much as possible, just because it's my style. I really like the amount of power and density of sound that I can have with the wrist motion. Okay, so speed and the type of rebound that I have will be the first things that I have to kind of like keep in consideration when I'm choosing the technique or the grip that I have to use. And then from there, once I know, okay, at this speed, on this surface, I could use 2-3 different techniques, I will go with the ones that I prefer because of my personal style and my personal sound. So in the case of this exercise in particular, I was using wrist motion, but if you want to develop finger motion, then you can also do this exercise with using a finger motion, or if you want push-pull, or if you want a molar. Okay, you can do this type of exercises with what technique you want to master the most, okay? You don't have to do it in any specific way. But if you want to do something that allows you to play on surfaces that don't have a lot of rebound, you already know that you might want to use more a molar approach or wrist approach and not finger, and so you have to then work, in that direction. Awesome, guys. Those were the questions for today. If you want to dive deeper into any of these topics or a more personalized experience, feel free to visit my website, jamespaynedrums.com. You will find tons of in-depth content, drills, workouts, and exercises covering everything we talked about and more. On jamespaynedrums.com, I also do weekly live streaming sessions where you can ask me questions live and we can work together to personalize your progress on drums. Use the code JPDYTB to get a special discount when you sign up. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.